Well, welcome to Christ in Culture. This is Pastor Jeff Short. Glad to have you along for another program where we tackle a contemporary cultural issue from a Christian biblical standpoint. I see this ministry as sort of a discipleship ministry where we help Christians understand what the Bible says about things and help them apply what the Bible says about things in the contemporary culture. And today we're going to be basically picking through the wreckage of the midterm elections here in the United States as far as Christian morality is concerned, because a number of states on the ballot had propositions that would either codify the pro-abortion decisions in the Supreme Courts of these states or the constitutions of these states, or it would make illegal abortions in these states. And in every instance, the people of these states that had the issue of abortion up for vote, they voted against the human life of the baby in the womb. They voted for the pro-choice, pro-abortion, pro-death cause. Very discouraging. In fact, in Montana, the most discouraging vote was that the good people of Montana, for some reason or another, voted to not save the life of a child that was born alive as the result of an abortion. So you would think that that would be a part of common humanity. You would think that even a pro-abortion person would have said, well, you know, that if a baby is born alive, even though the doctor was trying to do an abortion, we are obligated by our own humanity to try to save that child, because obviously the abortion did not work and there was something wrong with the procedure. But no, the people of Montana voted that if that baby is born alive, that the doctor may well just leave that baby to die outside of the womb. Just leave it on the table or throw it away or whatever. It's not worthy of human life. That is so shocking that I don't even have any words to describe that condition. So I don't know what's going on with the people of Montana or what's going on in their mind, but that is very discouraging. And then another, there was a Proposition 3 in Michigan where the people of Michigan voted to basically enshrine the Roe v. Wade wording in the state of Michigan Constitution. So in reaction to the Roe v. Wade reversal by the Supreme Court this past year, the people of Michigan said, okay, well, we're going to codify Roe v. Wade the way it was before it was overturned. We're going to codify it in our state constitution. So it wasn't enough that Roe v. Wade was overturned. Now people in the state of Michigan evidently want abortions to continue as if or even greater than when Roe v. Wade was the law of the land. It's just phenomenal as far as how far we have declined in morality here in the United States in the past nearly 50 years since the Roe v. Wade decision of 73. And it just seems to get worse and worse and worse. So what does that show? It shows that it's not just bad leaders that can be blamed for the abortion situation here in the United States. It's not just that we have a bad Supreme Court or we have bad senators or we have bad congressmen and congresswomen or we have bad governors or mayors. It's not just the leadership that's corrupt in this country. We have to come to the conclusion, finally, if we hadn't already known this, is that it's the voter who is corrupt. It's the citizens of this country that are corrupt. It's not just the leaders of this country. You know, for a long time, we heard a lot of pro-life activists and pro-life leaders say, well, Roe v. Wade was imposed on the people by evil, corrupt Supreme Court justices in 1973. And that is true in the sense that voters didn't vote for it back in 1973. It was imposed on the citizenry of the United States. So for a long time, the pro-life movement basically said that if you give this choice to the people, they will have common sense, they will have common moral decency, they will vote against abortion. Well, in the last midterm election we just had, we have come to the point in this country where we no longer can say this is a problem of leadership and of corrupt leadership. No, we have to say, no, this is a problem of citizenry, of voters, of corrupt, sinful, evil, wicked voting on the part of the citizens. Now, whether they are totally cognizant of what they're doing or whether they're being tricked by propagandistic ads, we saw a lot of that. It's a combination of voters who just don't care about the unborn, and they're also being propagandized and they're being brainwashed by the media on social media and peer pressure and so on and so forth. But we have to come to the conclusion, finally, that it's not just bad leadership that we can blame our moral decline on here in the United States. It is bad citizenry. It is bad voters who actually vote for these corrupt leaders. And, you know, as Christians, we kind of knew that all along. When you have people voting for abortion leaders like they do, you have to stop and say, well, wait a minute. These leaders aren't just assuming the offices that they're holding. They were put there. They were voted there by citizens. They were voted there by people. And so you really can't blame the leaders for doing what they already said they would do in the primaries and leading up to the elections. They told the citizens what they do. All of these pro-abortion politicians were declaring themselves pro-abortion before the elections, and voters voted them in. So we finally have to come to the conclusion, the hard truth, and it's not a leadership problem per se. It is a citizenship problem. And it was exactly what John Adams said, one of the founding fathers, back 200 years ago. He said, our nation, our democracy can only work for a moral and religious people. It's inadequate for any other kind of people. And that is so true. So as we see the decline of the Christian moral standards in our society and Christian moral spirituality, we have to conclude Adams was right. You know, as our citizenry become more secular and immoral and corrupt, we will see our society become moral, corrupt, and degenerate. And that's exactly what we're seeing. And so we have to look at the wreckage of what just happened for the cause of life and say, why did this happen? And what can we do as Christians to respond to this disaster that we saw in the midterms as far as the issue of abortion and saving human life is concerned? Now, one of the problems that I noticed in this last election cycle was that the so-called conservatives, the so-called Republicans, the so-called pro-life candidates, the ones that were vying for the pro-life vote, they weren't very articulate and they weren't very enthusiastic and motivating and inspiring in their defense of human life in the womb. And I'll just give a couple examples. The first one was out in, for example, New York State, where there was a Republican, supposedly conservative, Lee Zeldin, who is personally pro-life, running against a very ultra-liberal Kathy Hochul, who is pro-abortion all the way through, and in a very pro-abortion state because of the New York City influence. But Lee Zeldin, who is supposedly pro-life, basically had to come out in order to get votes. He said to the people of New York, he said, well, I'm pro-life personally, but I promise, I pledge you that I will not change in any way the abortion status quo in the state of New York. And I'm thinking, wait, You're a pro-life candidate and you're pledging that you will not oppose abortion in New York State, and you're running on the conservative ticket, you're running on the Republican ticket, and you're wanting people who are pro-life Christians and trying to end the abortion holocaust, and you're saying you won't do a thing about it? So this, I fear, is going to be the new tactic for Republicans. They're going to begin to distance themselves from abortion, and in maybe a decade or so, Republicans will be pro-abortion just like the Democrats, or they won't fight against abortion. They're going to just basically wipe their hands of that issue and say, well, that's over, that's done, we won't do anything to upset the abortion status quo. If that's the case, I'm sorry for a lot of Christians like myself, we're basically not going to be voting Republican, because I have pledged all my life I will never vote for a pro-abortion politician anywhere. And I haven't ever voted for a pro-abortion politician knowingly anywhere that I've ever lived. And so we're going to see some very strange alignments coming up in the future. And if Republicans don't take a hard and fast stand on abortion, I think Christians will basically abandon that party, as real Bible-believing Christians have abandoned the Democratic Party. But there's another situation in Michigan now. The woman who is running for governor there, she is, again, pro-life. She's a conservative person and was courting the pro-life Christian vote. And again, she did not mount a strong defense for human life. She allowed these attack ads from the Democrats to basically go unanswered. And this really shows a bad leadership strategy, because we have the upper hand in the argument for the pro-life cause. And why would we shy away from the stronger hand? It makes no rational sense. I'm going to play for you a video that was made. I think it's a brilliant video, and it basically shows what abortion is, and it shows it in an animated way. And I was simply thinking when I saw this, why didn't our politicians, our so-called conservative politicians, if the Democrats want to talk about abortion, we should be eager to do that, because we should expose it for what it is, the violent act of murder that it is. And so I want to show this abortion clip and say, why didn't we show them, if they want to go here, this is where we'll go, and face the cold, cruel reality of abortion and talk about that. And as long as they want to talk about it, we can talk about it. So here's the video called The Procedure, and I'm going to bring this up, and we're going to watch it, and then we'll talk about why our politicians didn't use this.
I just arrived at work as the hospital's lead sonographer and was looking at the patient's schedule for the day when my boss told me to go immediately to the OR. The surgeon was requesting ultrasound guidance. That was all the information I was given. I had no idea what I was walking into. I wheeled the ultrasound machine into the OR. The patient was already sedated on the operating table. Plugging in the machine, I waited for instructions from the doctor. He barked at me to place the ultrasound probe on the patient's pelvis so he wouldn't perforate her uterus. Still confused about the procedure, I did as he asked and realized the woman was pregnant. She was in her second trimester, so I easily determined the gender of her baby, a little girl. Stunned, I watched the doctor thrust a catheter into the amniotic sac. The fetus dodged the catheter and tried to hide in the top of her mother's uterus to get away. In horror, I watched as he inserted a forceps clamp and grabbed her tiny leg. She writhed around in pain, trying to break free, but there was nowhere for her to go. Then the doctor pulled hard until her leg ripped away from her body. She recoiled and violently twisted around in pain and curled herself into a tight ball. But it was no use. The clamp grabbed her arm and she struggled to pull away. Her movements weakened now because she was dying. He pulled her arm off of her body. My vision blurred. My eyes filled with tears. The child again curled herself into a tight ball, but again, the device grabbed her other leg and it was ripped from her body. By now, her heartbeat had slowed significantly, but she was still alive. The clamp grabbed her last limb and ripped it off. She wiggled and squirmed around, and then her heart finally stopped beating. I announced that there was no more cardiac activity. The nurse and scrub tech in the room gasped, realizing for the first time that this was happening to a fetus that was still alive. The remaining body parts, the head and torso, were removed. Placenta was removed, and a final look with ultrasound revealed all products of conception were removed. I was told I could leave the room. Up until that moment, I had been frozen. I silently removed the ultrasound machine from the operating room, went directly to the locker room, and threw up. I quit my job at that hospital shortly after. I told my boss I would never again participate in that type of procedure. I was having nightmares and could not escape the memory of what I had witnessed. I would never again assist in the murder of a child. It was over 20 years ago, but it's just as vivid in my mind today as the day it happened. The saddest part is that this procedure is still happening today. People have no idea we are murdering babies in this way. They think it isn't a person, that it's just a mass of tissue. I'm so sorry for what happened to this little girl, for what I did to her. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry.
Wow, that is so dramatic. And it's so clear from the presentation that this is the taking of a human life. So why was it such a problem for the politicians on our side, the conservative, pro-life, Republican politicians? Why was it so hard for them to make the argument against abortion? Why was it so much of a difficulty for them to not stand up strongly for human life and say, look, if you want to talk about abortion, let's talk about abortion, because you're talking about the killing of an unborn child, and talk about the awful gruesomeness of killing an unborn child. Instead, what happened, for example, in Michigan, there was a multi-million-dollar ad campaign by pro-abortion, Planned Parenthood, and the radical left, multi-million-dollar ad campaign that was all over social media. You couldn't turn on your computer. You couldn't go onto the internet. You couldn't go to your smartphone. You couldn't go anywhere without hearing these ads. And basically, it was a scare tactic. It said, they're trying to take away our human rights. They're trying to take away the woman's right to choose. They're trying to take away the right for her to control her own body. And they just kept hammering away that the women's rights are being taken away and they're under assault, and we have to codify Roe v. Wade in the Constitution of Michigan, and so on and so forth. That went on for months and months and months, all summer long, into the fall, right up to the election day, and not any kind of response by the Republican mayoral or governor candidate, Tudor Dixon, not any kind of comeback, not any kind of public refutation. The ads were saying, Tudor Dixon, the Republicans, the conservatives, they don't allow for any exceptions, and they're just wanting to take away your freedoms. They're wanting to take away your choice to do what you want with your own body. And women need the right to choose and when to start a family, and just argument after argument after argument. And I just read the other day in the Detroit News where the chairman of the Republican Party in Michigan essentially was blaming the loss of Tudor Dixon on her own choice to not engage on the issue of abortion. And so instead of getting out there with the pro-life message, instead of getting out there with the airtight arguments against abortion and how gruesome it is and how savage it is and how brutal it is and how we don't want to have blood on our hands in the state of Michigan and logic like that, was basically complete silence. And the strategy was that we'll just let the Democrats talk about abortion and we'll talk about other issues, the things that the polling data show are very important. We'll talk about inflation, and we'll talk about the high prices of gasoline, and we'll talk about education, and we'll talk about all these other issues that are very, very important. But basically, Tudor Dixon and her campaign camp decided that they were not going to defend the pro-life cause. They were not going to get in the battle and say, okay, Democrats, if you want to talk about abortion, let's really talk about abortion, what it really is, and show video like the one we just saw about the procedure and how barbaric and cruel, evil, violent it is. And asking the citizens of Michigan, do we really want to be a state with blood on our hands? Do we really want to be a state where women come to get their babies killed by professional hitmen, assassins, abortion doctors? Do we really want to be a bloody, murderous, violent state that takes the life of the innocent children in the womb? She didn't get into that. She did not engage. It's as if you have a boxer and these two boxers are going at it, and the one is just flailing and beating the pulp out of somebody, and the other one doesn't hit back. And that was what Tudor Dixon did. She did not engage the issue of abortion. She did not take it to the Democrats. She was basically just hunkering down and saying, well, I'm not going to talk about that because I don't think the voters want to talk about that issue. I'm going to talk about other issues that they seem to be more concerned about. Well, that strategy utterly failed, and it failed everywhere around the nation, basically, where the so-called conservative, pro-life person refused to engage on the issue of abortion. And there's no excuse for that because we have the stronger argument. There is no counter argument for the pro-death cause, the pro-abortion cause. There's no, it cannot be denied that there is a human life in the womb, biologically, scientifically. There's no question that there is human life in the womb and that you are killing human life, that you are taking human life. There's no question. There's no debate. But see, the other side wins if our side doesn't engage on that issue. And so what happened was, if you saw all around the country, wherever the political candidates took strong moral, social, conservative stands on these issues, they almost inevitably won strong. Whenever the pro-life, conservative, Republican candidate actually took a bold, strong stand for moral decency, the Republican conservative candidate won almost across the board. And wherever the pro-life Republican conservative candidate was wishy-washy or was weak or didn't want to engage in the argument and didn't want to refute and confront the Democrats on their bloody pro-abortion stand, whenever the weak, wimpy, conservative candidate refused to even engage, they almost inevitably lost. So what does that show? It shows that people want to have strong moral leadership, but they won't elect someone who doesn't even have the courage of his or her convictions. And so, contrary to alienating voters by talking about abortion, we can educate voters, we can inspire voters to oppose abortion because we have the stronger argument. We have science on our side. We have biology on our side. Across the board, on all of these social, moral, conservative issues, we have the facts and the evidence and reality on our side. And the Democrats, the left, the radical left have nothing except propaganda and scare tactics. But if we don't engage them on these issues, they are going to win by default. And we saw that in Michigan in this past midterm election. So it's got to be, we go out there and we defend the truth. And we have to have candidates who are strong enough to stand up to the enemy, the opposition, and say, okay, you want to talk about abortion? You brought it up. You want to engage on that issue? Okay, I'm game. Let's go at it. Let's go head to head on the issue of abortion. And you defend the so-called right of a woman to murder her child in the womb. You go ahead and try to defend that. You try to defend the dismembering and the destruction of a perfectly healthy baby in the womb. And I will take the opposite side. I will take the pro-life side. I will take the pro-moral, decency, humanity side, and let's see who comes out on top. We've got to do that. We've got to engage. And if we do engage, we win the argument and we win the election. So we need to be aware of these weak, wimpy, Republican, conservative, so-called pro-life candidates who simply won't engage and simply won't defend the truth. We have to be aware of them, and we have to say, no, I'm sorry, you may be a good person, you may have the right beliefs, but you don't have the courage of your convictions. We're going to elect candidates on our side who will stand for the truth and will fight for the truth and not back down, because we have the truth on our side. We have reality on our side. We have God on our side. And if we do suffer defeat, which there will be some, if we do suffer defeat, at least we will have gone down kicking and fighting and screaming and defending the truth. But it's bad enough to lose, but it's really bad to lose when you haven't even engaged the enemy and you just let the enemy win and you were too passive and weak and just sat on the sidelines while they ran all over you. So we need to elect strong pro-life candidates. And if the Republicans want to throw pro-abortion people, or they want to field candidates who are unwilling to defend the pro-life cause or just capitulate to the pro-abortion cause, we need to reject those. And if they throw them in there anyway, then we don't vote for them. And they lose the Christian vote. They lose the moral vote, the social conservative vote, and then they will learn you can't do that. So it's a whole new day today. We need to pray and fight for the life of the unborn and all the other issues that are important to God and our Christian faith. See you back next week. God bless.